Super Mario Maker 2. It is the second best-selling game on the Nintendo Switch in its lifespan. It may be banned in certain parts of North America and have multiple viruses embedded, but hardcore Mario fans immediately took fancy to its addictive and replayable gameplay. Being a Mario game, a lot of players want to be the fastest there is and have their name embroidered on the leaderboard as a trophy of their achievements. However, Mario Maker 2 doesn't really have any linear mode to speedrun, unlike other games in Mario's history. Story mode was an option, but you'd have to be a brain-dead dipshit to put any proper attempts into it. The community wanted more, and one team of dedicated players rose to the challenge. If Nintendo wasn't going to give them a run, they would make one themselves using World Builder. And after months of work, it was finished. This is the world record history of Super TeamPipe World. Let's start at the beginning. Super Mario Maker 2 was released on April 16th, 1989. It was a bold move for Nintendo to release a sequel before the original, but just looking at the sales figures shows how much of a success it was. Around 2020, when the Super World update was released, teams quickly strived to be the first to make a collaborative Kaizo Super World. What does that mean, you may ask? Well, for that, we need to talk about parallel universes. The term Kaizo stems from Japanese origin, from the terms kai, meaning kingly, and zo, meaning burger. Around 2015, the term became widely used to describe a Mario level that was purposely rearranged to be difficult, yet fair, for the best players to complete. Naturally, the community became more competitive and grew better at Kaizo levels exponentially. Levels that were once thought to be impossible were soon seen as easy under the eyes of some expert players. So, we know what Kaizo is, but what the heck is a TeamPipe? Well, no one really knows the answer to that. The only evidence of its existence dates back to the 18th century, where a drawing of what would come to be known as the Super Mario Bros. Pipe was found carved into a stone wall. This symbol became somewhat of a cult-worshipping idol, and members who confided in it slowly transitioned over to Mario, where they would see more of what they called the funny tube. On the 6th of August 2020, TeamPipe released their Super World, the first Kaizo collab Super World of its kind. This immediately caused traction, the team became a household name, and of course, players wanted to be the fastest to complete it. It is unsure of when the first proper speedrun of the game was completed. Due to the nature of the run, a speedrunner was not expected to one-shot every single level. Deaths were expected. Therefore, the first actual completion of the Super World could be considered the first actual speedrun. Oh, and we should probably map out how the run works. TeamPipe World has 5 worlds with 23 levels, 4 of which are optional. These 4 optional levels were far harder than the base levels, requiring an above-expert knowledge of the game. However, because they didn't need to be completed, speedrunners ignored them, opting to play instead the base 19 levels. The timer starts when New Game is selected, and ends when the player touches the flagpole of the final level. After a few days of the Super World being released, players began to clear all the levels, and the first speedrun was completed a couple days after in August of 2020 by a player known as the Riley C. Riley was no stranger to Kaizo levels, being an active member of the community throughout Mario Maker 1 and 2. Riley was the one to organize TeamPipe World, making 2 levels in the whole thing, 1-1 and 5-1. He also was the only one to upload all the levels himself, since Nintendo only allows worlds to be created from one person's levels. This meant Riley had hours of practice remaking and replaying every level, so he was the perfect candidate to set a good pace for the first speedrun. However, this speedrun was absolutely atrocious. It had so many mistakes and everyone laughed at him. Riley played through the Soup World as you'd expect. He went through Worlds 1 and 2 with just a couple dozen deaths. He had a small hiccup in World 3-3, costing him a few minutes, and had several dozen more deaths in the final 2 worlds. This speedrun was not about time saves or shortcuts. It was about consistency. The fewer deaths a runner had, the better. With that being said, this was one of the only runs to not employ something which would come to be known as 1-3 cheese. You see, Mario Maker scrolling works in weird ways. If you don't place any blocks on the upper half of a level, the screen will never scroll up there, even if Mario somehow gets on top. This was used to make levels only half the height of normal ones. The benefit of this meant the camera would always stay focused on the level and not just follow the player. The drawback to this, however, is the limited vertical space you have to build, meaning you have to be careful players can't just jump on top of the level and run to the end. Fortunately for speedrunners, 1-3 was a half-height level, and 5 days after the Super Worlds released, another Pipe World member called Yoshi discovered this oversight could be abused by quickly re-grabbing a spring in the first half and using it to get on top of the level in the second. This was huge because not only was this a significant time save, but it basically cut the half a level from the run, taking it down to just 18.5 levels that needed to be fully memorized. This was discovered shortly after Riley's run, and even though he played every level the intended way, he still clocked in a respectable 1 hour 34 minutes and 27 seconds. But there were still many speed strats to come. After the 1-3 strat was discovered, cool and handsome speedrunner Drates would take the world record down to 1 hour 21 minutes and 21 seconds. This was only his second speedrun of the game, but it was definitely improvement from Riley's run. Despite being after the 1-3 cheese discovery, Drates opted to go to the intended way because he was an idiot. Like Riley, however, Drates had also made 2 levels for the game, including the infamous 4-2. We'll come back to that later. Drates' run was solid, employing his own strat in 5-2 that made the start of the level very consistent. Instead of doing whatever the hell you're meant to do here, Drates just spun over the piranhas, then threw the beetle to cancel his spin and ground pounded to cancel his momentum. It didn't save any time, but was far more consistent over the intended strat. Both Riley and Drates continued making attempts, being the only active speedrunners in the category. But that week, Drates got down to 1 hour 6 minutes and 29 seconds. Riley also got better, but he couldn't contend. Drates always just had the edge, and he was handsome. But then, Yoshi started doing attempts. Yoshi was one of the best Kaizo players of his time, making insane levels that quickly became the status quo for the skill ceiling of future Kaizo levels. Yoshi also made for the Super World, but his level was optional. You'd think this would put him at a disadvantage, right? A 45:02. Yoshi had shattered the sub-hour barrier only a week after the Super World's release. But how did he do it? Well, he was just extremely consistent. No huge new strats were implemented into Yoshi's run. He only died a total of insert number here times. He had an extremely impressive 5-4, the final level of the run, which was infamous for having an inconsistent bomb setup. It seemed like Yoshi was going to stay unchallenged at the top spot for a while, right? Well, yeah. Other runs continued to come in from a new runner, Poke, and Drates got a 55-45 because he was so epic. Riley had stepped away from running the game at this point. Several weeks passed, and it was still less than a month since the game released. This is kind of boring. Let's talk about 4-2. 4-2 was undoubtedly the hardest level in the game. Maybe not the hardest in terms of skill, but for a speedrunner, getting a good 4-2 was vital. The level is mostly jumping between platforms on tracks, with little item abuse or overly complex setups. This seems fine at first, However, each section is 40 seconds each, separated by a single checkpoint. This means that if you got to the end of a section and died only once, you've just lost 40 seconds from the run, about 2.5% of the total speedrun. To make things worse, the hardest trick was at the end of the first half, catching a falling platform in midair. This one trick killed so many runs. Yoshi even stated that it was the hardest level in his run for that reason. What's worse is that's not even the end of that section. You still have to make a shell jump and do a precise spin jump to make it to the checkpoint. Despite making it, Drake's hella struggled with this level, whereas Yoshi was getting to the point where he'd be lucky to escape with only one death. But you know who was good at 4-2? Poke. On August 23rd, after steady progress taking his time down, Poke took his personal best to 46:29, just over a minute off the record. Not only was Poke good at 4-2, he was good at a lot of the later levels. Worlds 4 and 5 had a bit of a stark difficulty curve to them. Runners described the speedrun as only starting at World 4 for this reason, and everything before them was just setting a good enough time to compensate for the last two worlds. Poke was tantalizingly close to the record, but 5 hours after he submitted his 46:29, this happened. A 44:43. He had a bit of a sloppy 5-4, but Poke became the fourth person to hold the record for TeamPipe World in under a month. This would be the last run of his, however. Shortly after, Poke was scouted by NASA to accompany the Curiosity rover on its journey to Mars. They said his fast fingers and curly toes would be perfect for suiting the rover's needs. He was never seen again. World records went silent after Poke's 44:43 for a while. A really long while. The only active runner at this time was Drake's, who had gotten a time in the late 40s, but still struggled on some of the later levels. The community was in remiss. Weeks turned to months, and on 8th of November, Riley, Yoshi, and Drake's held a race in the hopes one of them would beat the record. Still, no luck. 2021 rolled by, but still no good runs. It seemed like Poke's 44:43 was here to stay. But then, after months of silence, Yoshi came back, and he had been practicing. A 33:56. Over 10 minutes of improvement had been made. But how? Well, Yoshi had just gotten really consistent, dying no more than 20 times across the whole run. His worlds 1 and 2 were flawless. He got good RNG in 3-3. He one-shot 4-2. And he had discovered a new skip in 5-4, the final level. 5-4 is another half-height level, so, using the propeller box, Yoshi found one spot where he could damage boost through the bomb and run over the top of the level to get to the checkpoint. It wasn't perfect, however. It only got Yoshi to the halfway point of the level. He couldn't get to the end because it was blocked off, so had to just take the checkpoint. However, it skipped to the bomb setup that was notoriously janky, making the level much more consistent. Sub 30 was now looking like a possibility, but it would need perfect gameplay. This insane record motivated one player to come back, and with Yoshi stating that this would be his final run, Drake saw this as his chance. Since Poke's new record, a new tool had been made that allowed people to view level layouts by typing in the level code to a website. Why is this important? because Nintendo removed the ability to do this in Mario Maker 2, after a 5-year-old was hospitalized from downloading a level and opening it in the editor too quickly. This website allowed runners to get a full grasp of every course, and Drates, now under the alias Fizzy, was determined to use it to find more cheese. And boy, did he find cheese. In 4-1, Fizzy found out that using a precise P-switch jump, you could get on top of the level. However, the ending was blocked off by munchers, so Fizzy still needed to grab the POW and bring it to the end. Regardless, this blew 4-1 open, making it basically a free level. And that wasn't all Fizzy had to say about World 4. The very next day, he discovered this. It was amazing how no one had found this before. It was the easiest skip in the whole Superworld, on the hardest level. Sadly, it only skipped the precise spin jump at the end of the first section, but this made 4-2 seem far easier, since there was no longer a huge choke point just before the checkpoint. Fizzy also found a faster way of doing 1-3. By going back with the Goomba Shoe, you could stand on the spikes and just avoid the hidden blocks preventing you from getting up. This was far easier than the original 1-3 skip, and was dubbed 2 boo strats, 1 boo strat, or no boo strats, depending on how many boos you had to kill to get the speed needed to make the jump. Using 1 boo was quicker, but a lot harder, and using no boos? Well, that was something only Yoshi could accomplish in an actual speedrun. In November 2021, Fizzy poured in hundreds of attempts to try and take the record back. With his skills slowly improving, he knew he could do this. Months later, on 17th of March 2022, Fizzy did this. $33.29. He pulled off 1 boo strats, he did the 4-1 and 4-2 cheese, and he had an amazing World 5. Fizzy had finally done it. After 400 attempts, the record was finally his again. And that's where the record lies to this day. Riley returned a few months later to attain a sub-hour, which he achieved, and a new runner, Ryan, made his way into the mid-40 range, but Fizzy's run was too good. A couple new strats were found in 2-4 and 5-3, but nothing that significant that could topple Fizzy from the throne. Yoshi didn't come back in September 2022 to take the record with a 31.56, and he didn't only die 10 times in this hypothetical run. Truly, the best runner had earned the crown, and maybe you could too someday if you got off your lazy ass and went and did the dishes. Thanks for watching.